The big HMOs are set up to design to serve a lot of people, but in this structure of the bottom line, people often get overlooked.
There is no overall structure and legal basis, but structure within the medical industry to police itself.
We help to keep the medical profession honest, because they have to, if they make those signs of mistakes, if they don't do what they're supposed to do, then they have to answer. And they ultimately have to answer in a court of law.
Doctors' main reason to exist is to heal people, and they are trusted by the public. And almost all doctors are worthy of that trust. A few doctors, unfortunately, are not.
I think American people are being misled by various medical organizations as well as insurance carriers by creating this false perception that there is a medical malpractice crisis. There is not. Article in the New England Journal of Medicine that was put on by the National Institute of Health, a survey said there's about 98,000 people a year dying from medical mistakes. That's about 200, my math is right, 270, 280 people a day. It's like crashing a jumbo jet every day and killing everybody on board. And these are needless deaths.
Some notice should be made, obviously, and some action taken about a doctor who habitually does wrong things.
And so this perception and keeping those sorts of things hidden, I think really disserves the American people.
Every day, somewhere in America, more than 300 innocent men, women, and children become victims of medical malpractice at the hands of incompetent and negligent doctors. Last year, over 98,000 victims were killed by doctors. More than 4 million victims are permanently injured each year.
Today, the Insider Exclusive goes behind the headlines in When Doctors Go Wrong, Deadly Medical Errors, to examine how Paul and Connie Henderson at the Henderson Law Firm got justice with a $4.5 million verdict against Kaiser Permanente in a major medical malpractice case. Paul is a retired Special Forces Lieutenant Colonel, pilot, as well as a successful trial lawyer who has built his reputation based on aggressive and creative trial work. They have obtained numerous 6- and 7-figure verdicts and settlements for clients who have been involved in traumatic situations which altered their lives physically, mentally, and financially. And it has earned them the highest respect from citizens and lawyers alike as two of the best trial lawyers in Washington and in America. He has seen many innocent and hardworking people injured and killed by negligent and incompetent doctors, hospitals, and nurses. Paul and Connie's shared passion is problem solving. They approach each medical negligence case as scientists as well as lawyers trying to solve a puzzle. And because they have seen many patients suffer needless injury, together they make it a dedicated mission to get legitimate and truthful answers to what really happened to their clients in each case. And through the American judicial process, together, they get answers to these tough questions, which result in hospitals and doctors being more responsible to patients and society. These successes drive them to help more people who have been harmed by incompetent and negligent doctors. Their shared goal? To make medicine safer and more accountable, and of course, to get the justice their clients deserve. This is the Insider Exclusive, live from Rancho Palos Verdes, California.
It is my great privilege to introduce Paul and Connie Henderson. Welcome to the show.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Tell our audience a little bit about your law firm. What type of law do you practice?
Well, we represent people who've been injured. Mainly, most of our focus right now is people who've been injured through medical negligence, through mistakes made by doctors, by hospitals, other healthcare professionals. They've been injured or in some cases killed, and we represent them and their families.
You must find that very rewarding, right, Connie?
Yes, it is. Our Our clients typically come to us when they're going through a really hard time. Physically, emotionally, a lot of times financially. So to be able to help them is very rewarding.
Right. Now, there are many types of law that a lawyer can practice. They can work for a major law firm that represents Exxon or IBM, but you choose to represent the little guy. Why is that, Connie?
Because they don't have the money to get to the resources. If they can't find an attorney who will represent them, they'll be completely left behind.
Someone has to represent them. You kind of closely identify yourself with the underdog, right, Paul?
Well, yeah, that's true, and I think I've always had that kind of a bent toward the underdog. And the unfortunate thing is, you know, we like to think that we're fair, and most people are. But when they get into this system and they've got some huge corporation, some huge insurance company on the other side of them, they take this corporate mentality, which is the bottom line is everything.
Yeah.
And so those issues of fairness and often cases truth get thrown to the side, and because it's all about the money.
Yeah.
And so that's where we think we can do something for some people because they need somebody to help them.
Speaking of medical malpractice cases and all about the money, today the reason we're doing this show is you had a very successful big verdict against one of America's most well-known healthcare companies, Kaiser Permanente, right?
Yes.
Tell our audience a little bit about what happened in this case, you know, right from the beginning.
Well, it was a 51-year-old man, and he, well, his name is Greg, and he was having some just experiences that he couldn't quite understand. He'd get a rushing feeling in his abdomen that would go up to his head, and a little bit of fearfulness.
Commonly called what, like a panic attack?
Well, that's what the doctor called it.
Yeah.
What he was really having was what's called a simple partial seizure.
Right.
And the doctor said, "Oh, I think you're having panic attacks." And what was going on was he had a tumor in his brain. And instead of referring him to have those evaluated, like through an MRI or a CT scan of his brain, they just gave him Paxil for 7 years while the tumor continued to grow.
The tumor started out, I believe, I remember correctly, size of an eraser, grew to the size of a golf ball or tennis ball. What happened to your client?
Well, during the 7 years, his symptoms increased somewhat. But he, so when they did, they gave him more Paxil. Eventually, the tumor became so, expanded so much into his brain that he lost all control. He started passing out, vomiting, he couldn't walk, couldn't talk. That's when they took him into the hospital and did an MRI, which revealed the tumor in his head.
And what were the Kaiser doctors saying during all this time when they saw the results and what was going on?
Well, they consistently just told him to take more Paxil and come back in a year. Even when his symptoms were getting worse, they would just increase the dosage of the Paxil and say, come back in a year. He, you know, as this progressed, he started having changes in his personality. He started having real anger management issues. He developed urinary issues. He had to have a catheter. And all of it ultimately was explained by the brain tumor, but the doctors didn't pick up on any of it as it was going on.
Yeah. One of the reasons we do these medical malpractice case shows is because when your client passed away, what did Kaiser say to the family? Sorry.
Essentially, yeah, I'm sorry.
And how long did it take before they realized that maybe something hadn't been diagnosed properly, maybe there had been a mistake made? When did that come to them, and how did they end up coming to you?
It happened when they finally did the MRI after he started having the severe symptoms.
Yes.
And one of the doctors, a neurosurgeon who was working with him, finally said he was not having panic attacks. This was not a psychological problem. He had a slow-growing brain tumor. He'd had it for several years.
And he told the family that?
Yes.
And that's when they said, this is medical malpractice, correct?
Well, probably not in so many words,
Yeah.
but they suspected
was a mistake.
something was not right
Yeah.
here, and so that's when they came to me.
So when someone comes to you with a case like this, what are the issues that you have to prove, and how difficult are they to prove?
Well, we have to prove that there was what's called a violation of the standard of care, that the physician did or failed to do something that a reasonably prudent physician would do in the same circumstances. So they have to prove that they did something wrong.
Yeah.
And secondly, that what they did wrong is what caused the ultimate outcome. And then that somebody was hurt as a result of this. It was
Yeah.
a damage to them.
Now, this was a rather challenging case because Kaiser put on a lot of experts who said it was what? It was the patient's fault that he died, right?
They said it was anybody's fault but theirs.
Yeah.
That he was actually having panic attacks, that it wasn't really a brain tumor. That that he should have got more opinions.
Yeah.
He got 3 from 3 different doctors who all
Right.
said the same thing.
I remember reading that they even said that they had done the family a favor.
That came up in the trial.
What exactly did they say?
Well, when they finally got down to where they couldn't find anything else to talk about, they said,
They said this in open court.
oh yeah, it was in the defense counsel's final argument, and they said, if this had been discovered earlier, he would have had to go through all those years of treatment and surgery and so on, which of course would have saved his life, but they didn't.
They left that part out.
They left that part out. So in essence, we did him a favor
Yeah.
by
Now,
not diagnosing it.
there was an autopsy done.
Yes.
Autopsies generally show why someone died, right? I mean, they're pretty conclusive, aren't they?
That was always my impression.
What was Kaiser's interpretation of the autopsy that was done?
They put on 2 different experts, and when the autopsy showed that he died of this brain tumor, they put on 2 different experts, both of whom said, well, autopsies aren't really a very reliable source for determining the cause of death.
Yeah. Then what would be?
Well, their review of the records years later. And I said, hey, I'm just a guy from Vancouver, but I thought that's what autopsies were for.
What was the verdict?
The verdict was a little over $4.5 million.
And they had offered before the trial and into the trial, how much money had they offered to settle the case?
Initially, they offered $100,000. And after the jury was already out, they increased it to $150,000.
$50,000 more.
Yeah.
And the jury came back with $4.5 million roughly, right?
Correct.
Well, congratulations on the case. It was, I'm sure, a hard-fought battle because when you're facing all these experts, the jury has a tendency to believe, a lot of people with white coats, don't they?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
There's a lot of medical reverence in society.
We have with us today one of your experts that was on the case, and his name is Dr.
Malin Dollinger.
Malin Dollinger, and we're going to have him on right now because he was pretty persuasive for the jury, wasn't he?
He was instrumental in this verdict.
Okay, well, let's have him on right now. It is my greatest pleasure to introduce Dr. Malin Dollinger. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, sir. Glad to be here.
You are an expert oncologist as well as a well-known author. And Paul, he was your expert in this case, wasn't he?
Yes, he was.
Can you tell our audience a little bit about this case in terms of what you saw that the Kaiser doctors didn't do?
All those years, he had symptoms which were called a panic attack. I have some close friends with panic attacks. I'm rather familiar with them in addition to what I've learned. And it wasn't a panic attack. Panic attack has a set of symptoms and is clearly defined by the psychiatrist. And this was not what this was. It happened, for example, several times a day. Panic attacks don't usually happen several times a day. And as they got worse, it became clear, even more clear, that it wasn't a panic attack.
Yeah.
And when they gave him Paxil, it relieved some of his anxiety because anybody having a seizure, the body is shaking, would be anxious. And so, of course, the Paxil seemed to help his shaking, and he felt a little bit better. It didn't change the brain tumor at all, of course.
You know, I have seen, we've done a lot of medical malpractice cases, and what I've seen is once a doctor makes a diagnosis, when he comes in for subsequent visits, rather than looking at it afresh, new, they just seem to rubber stamp what the last doctor said. Do you think that this was kind of the case here? Because had a MRI been done, you know, immediately when he was diagnosed to see if, you know, maybe this wasn't the proper diagnosis, then this could have been caught earlier. Do you find that to be the case with a lot of doctors?
Oftentimes doctors will look at the medical records and will simply repeat what the previous doctor or the diagnosis was. They won't think for themselves anymore, particularly after a few years, and there's 10 or 20 or 30 times other doctors have said the same. No one's going to start from scratch unless they are thoughtful and they know better.
Yeah. You know, you are kind of a rare breed. There are very few doctors who will come out and say negative things of other doctors. I've seen this time and time again. You know, they kind of stick together. Nobody wants to say a doctor did something wrong. What are your viewpoints of doctors who are incompetent and negligent? What do you think should be done with those doctors?
Well, we should police our own people.
Right.
Nobody else will do it as good as we can. And we think the doctors are liable. If they make a mistake and they didn't do something right because they should have done something right, they should suffer the consequences, whatever is legal. I defer here to the attorney about that. But we have to police ourselves, and I don't mind saying if the doctor made a mistake if that's the truth.
Yeah. When you have a case going on, the other side will put on experts, as they did in this case, right? They had 9 experts, right? They had experts that testified that autopsies were not reliable. What do you think about that?
Well, that's taking the answer and going back to the question.
Yeah.
The answer is we have to win the case. And to win the case, we have to say the autopsy is no good. But that, of course, is false. The autopsy is the classic answer for what caused death.
Yeah. How did you see the faces in the jury when the Kaiser doctors came out and said the autopsy is not reliable?
Yeah, they were astounded. I mean, they had the same reaction I did. I thought that's what an autopsy was for.
Yeah.
They said it with a straight face.
One of the problems that we see in the medical profession, and you are a doctor, is that many of the state medical review boards do not provide information to the general public about a doctor's lawsuits, record, disciplinary actions, none of that. What would you like to see change in that regard so we can find out a little bit about someone who may be operating on us in a life or death situation?
There should be an easily accessible database of the history of malpractice for each doctor, or at least alleged malpractice. Not every time it's malpractice. Sometimes the doctor did not commit any offense. But now you can't get that information. The newspapers, the popular media, if something really awful happens, a doctor is put in jail for some reason, of course that reaches the media. But there should be an easy way for people in general to get the information.
And the medical profession has to take the lead on that, don't they?
Absolutely.
But the people who are preventing that are the insurance companies, aren't they, Paul?
Largely, yes.
Yeah, because they don't want to admit liability or responsibility. Right?
Yeah, and the unfortunate part I find is that because there's this lack of policing that I see, is that we wind up being the police force, and that's fine, but it's a prolonged procedure doing this.
From a doctor's perspective, do you think that these lawsuits that are successfully won against incompetent and negligent doctors, do you think they somewhat police the healthcare industry? Do you think they do any good?
They do some good, but really not enough. Because each doctor says, I'm okay. And I'm not part of that population of people who's not okay. If you ask each doctor, which doctor would you go to if you're sick? Those are the good doctors. Yeah. Or which doctor would you not go to? If there were such a list that we could all compile, if we were able to do that or willing to, that would be a help.
Boy, I'd like to put that list together, I'm telling you. Okay, well, I want to thank you very much for being on this program. You provided insight from a medical professional's point of view that we normally don't get. Thank you.
Thank you.
Medical malpractice cases are often very hard to prove. And when a law firm evaluates a case, what do they look for? What do you look for when you decide to take a medical malpractice case?
Well, we initially look for whether there's, we call it the oh my God factor. If a lay person, a regular person on the street hears what happened, would they say, oh my God, I can't believe the doctors did that?
It's got to be serious, and unfortunately, oftentimes it involves somebody dying, doesn't it?
Very often. Not always, though.
Medical malpractice sounds like some big words. What does it actually mean, Paul?
Well, it simply means that the people go when they're should be getting simple, direct, thoughtful care, and for whatever reason, somebody is overworked or somebody doesn't have the correct knowledge or something along those lines, that they simply don't. And the care that they receive is substandard and actually hurts them.
Yeah. When a family suspects that medical malpractice has happened, either with themselves or one of their family members, how can they get their medical records? Are hospitals prone to withhold records? Is it difficult to find out what happened?
Yeah, usually for the individual it is. They have the absolute right to their records.
But they don't give it up.
No.
So how do you get this information generally?
They're more responsive when we request them. If necessary, we have the power of subpoena.
Yeah.
So we can get the full records and they have to produce them.
Yeah.
But it can be difficult.
A lot of times people come to us because they haven't been able to figure out what happened. They don't know whether there was negligence because they haven't been able to get their records and the doctors aren't explaining things.
Yeah, and most people who come to you, and I think this is a very important part of the show, most people who come to you have never really been involved with a lawsuit before, have they?
No.
They don't know anything about the law. And the first thing that pops up in their mind is, this is going to cost me money and I don't have it, correct?
Usually, yes.
I want to emphasize that the plaintiff's bar, which you represent the little guy. You don't charge them any money not only to evaluate the case, but if you take on the case, you're not going to charge them any money up front, and you only are paid if your case is successful, correct?
That's right.
So for anybody out there who suspects that medical malpractice was, they have a medical malpractice case, they can come to law firms like your own, have it evaluated at no cost, to see if there is a case, correct?
That's right.
All right, well, you guys did a wonderful job in this case, and I'm glad the family got what they deserved, although they would have liked to had, their family member still alive today, and that would have happened had Kaiser diagnosed the case properly, right?
Absolutely.
I want to thank both of you for being on our show. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve.
Thanks for joining us. You can get more information about our guest and the issues at insiderexclusive.com.